Good morning, and thank you for joining us at Trialogue's fourth webinar of the year. We host these forums on a monthly basis on the last Thursday of the month, so mark it on your calendar. I'm Sheldon Morias. I'm Thought Leadership Manager at Trialogue. Thank you once again for joining us this morning. Great to see the numbers picking up. We'll just give it a minute or so as more people join, but thank you very much to those of you who are already online. And today we'll be exploring the topic of impactful disaster relief investing and how companies can approach their CSI projects in a more strategic and proactive way. Now, we know from news reports and our own experiences, whether it was the COVID-19 pandemic, the recent flooding and the like, there's been an increase in large-scale disasters in South Africa. The once-in-a-lifetime shock of COVID-19, as I'd mentioned, and we also have sporadic incidents of social unrest, which shakes people's lives. Leads to damage of infrastructure, and there's quite a bit of rebuilding that needs to happen in those instances as well. So we know that South African businesses have joined government and civil societies, and increasingly so, their efforts in responding to these disasters. So that's, but with global temperatures rising and climate change impact expected to just increase exponentially in the coming years, if we don't do anything about it as those global temperatures rise, we need to explore and ask ourselves, how do companies think about their role more strategically to have greater impact, not only in terms of responding to the disaster, but building resilient communities, rebuilding communities as well, and being proactive in terms of the type of measures that we put in place on that regard there. So great to see the numbers coming in as people join. So thank you for joining us this morning as well. If you've just joined, I'm Sheldon Morias, Thought Leadership Manager at Trialogue. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss impactful disaster relief investing as well. I'm looking forward to today's conversation to explore some of the innovative ways that companies and NPOs can respond to disaster relief investing and incidents as well. We're doing that through the lens of the Industrial Development Corporation, large corporates, NPOs, and other organizations as well, and learning from them in terms of how they're driving disaster relief efforts to communities, to help communities rebuild, regroup, become resilient, and overcome these crises, and obviously rebuild their lives. I just want to say thank you to the IDC for sponsoring this webinar and bringing it to you in partnership with us, and continuously supporting thought leadership at Trialogue. We really appreciate your ongoing support there. And thanks to our panelists for sharing their insights and their time with us this morning as well. And obviously thanks to you, our audience, for joining us for this morning. And I also just want to mention that we've extended the webinar to 90 minutes. This is our second one where we've extended it to 90 minutes. Previously, it was 60 minutes, but there was overwhelming feedback from our audience, from you, to lengthen them so that we are able to engage, that we're able to pose more of your questions and really, expand on the conversation as well. So really, thank you very much for your recommendations. And your feedback to us, and obviously joining us as well. A few technical points as we go through, and I'll do the introduction. There are two ways for you to engage with us on this call. There is the chat box just next to the participant. You'll be able to see there. That's where you can engage with your fellow audience members as well, and give them comments. Let us know who you are as well. That's the box for you to use to engage. And then with the Q&A box, just to a couple of blocks to the right on that's where you pose your questions to the panelists. I'll be going through that through that Q&A box, and then pulling questions out of that to enrich the conversation for you to have your say as well in the conversation. So remember, the Q&A box is where you pose your questions to the panelists as well. So thank you very much on that. We really do encourage you to share your questions. It's an opportunity for some of them to be answered, those burning questions to be answered as well. Just do keep them succinct so that we can get through as many as possible. And if you can, note which panelist you'd like it addressed to. Then there's a short survey that will pop up at the end of the session. As I said to you, we do take your feedback very seriously. We'd like you to please fill that in. It's very short, but it just lets us know what you found interesting, and it lets us tailor our future webinars so that they are of true value to you. And then just finally, the session is being recorded, and if you have registered, it will be shared with you at a later stage. There'll also be an article summary on our Trialogue Knowledge Hub as well, and you'll be able to go through that if there's anything that you would like to revisit from the conversation today. So thank you very much. As just a brief note on the program on our agenda for today, I'll have a brief introduction, just telling you a bit about Trialogue, as well as and more importantly, about the topic on discussion for today. Then I'll hand over to our panelists for an opening statement from each one of them. I've got with me today, really graciously giving us their time, Tebogo Molefe. She's Manager of Corporate Social Investment at the IDC, our partner on this webinar. We've got Dr. Moses Khangale. He's Manager of Stakeholder Programs at Santam, who do a lot of good work in the disaster relief space, aligning it to their business. And Kopano Masilo, the head of the Pretoria cluster, the International Federation of the Red Cross, one of the key organizations that respond and are on the front line when disasters happen and unfold, and as people rebuild their lives. Following those opening comments, we'll then go to a moderated Q&A where I will pose some questions to the panelists and also draw your questions in as well. The real meat of today's discussion, and then we'll just have closing comments from the panelists, their final thoughts, something for you to take away, for you to implement, whether you're a corporate and crafting your CSI strategy, whether you're an NPO responding to disasters and helping people on the ground, or in government or academics or anyone else. So thank you very much for that. I'm now going to go straight to our first poll of the morning. This will appear on the screen now. We'd like to know which organization you're from. This will help the panelists and myself tailor the discussion to make it as effective for you as possible. I'll leave that up for a couple of minute, for you to fill that out. Great. Good to see. We've got a lot of non-profits, big business, great. Small and medium businesses as well. You've got a role to play, very important as well. We've got a couple of consultants, academics, and then others. So great to see that audience, and as more people join this morning. So thank you very much for your time. And those are coming in. That's great, great. Most of you having voted. If you haven't already, if you're in the 30% who haven't voted as yet, I'll give you a couple of more seconds for you to let us know where you're from and who's on the call with us today as we tailor that. So thank you very much. Okay, perfect. We can share that result so that you can also see who's in the room with you, the virtual room with you this morning. So just a reminder, I'll just do a brief introduction before we head to the real meat of the discussion there. So that's great. 50% of you representing NPOs or from NPOs, around a quarter from big business, We've also got small and medium-sized businesses represented here today, consultants and academics and others. So thank you for that one there. Let's share that result. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. That's the first poll of the day. We've got two more coming up for us on that one, but we will give you enough time to vote on that. So let me just jump. I'm pleased to see a couple of familiar names on the call, as well as some new names as well. And thank you for joining our regular CSI and nonprofit network as well. Welcome to our first timers. And I'd like to just take you through briefly about Trialogue. So we're one of the few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, which are really aimed at capacity building and sharing knowledge in the industry, all of which aim to make CSI in South Africa more effective. So the two main types of consulting that we do are monitoring and evaluation and CSI strategy development. On the knowledge sharing platforms, we run our annual conference. That's our Business in Society conference, which we held over 2 days in May, planning already underway for next year's event. So keep an eye out for that. And then also please take some time to, you can read on this year's topics if you missed out on it, the keynote addresses. It really was a fabulous and engaging conference that we've got there. We also publish our annual Business in Society handbook. It's the foremost research document in this in the CSI sector, and we invite you to profile the development work that you're doing, whether you're a nonprofit or corporate as well, and that is set to come out in the first week of December. So all of those who participated in our NPO surveys or our corporate survey, thank you very much. If you haven't, please get in touch with us, and we'd like to hear. That's an opportunity for you to have your say as well. And then finally, returning to the Knowledge Hub, this is where our online body of knowledge that unpacks specific topics in development and is aimed at strengthening the impact in investment in those areas, as I'd mentioned there. So you can visit it throughout the year, and that's where the article for this will be posted as well. So thank you very much for that. And just a reminder, the write-up and the recording of the webinar will be uploaded to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. Okay, so now we're putting the second poll up, which speaks to today's topic. What do you believe is the most critical factor in enhancing disaster preparedness and resilience in South Africa? I'll leave that up just for you to take in the question, take in the options, and please do vote in this. Thank you. Great to see the votes coming in. Growing support for collaboration between corporations, government, and NGOs, which is our big theme for the year, is collaboration. Collaboration for impact and for change as well. Effective early warning systems coming through at just under 20%, as does robust disaster response plans. So planning, important. Some of you telling us there. And then community education and awareness, getting strong voting as well there. Infrastructure improvements, some of you showing that there. So thank you to those who voted. 43% saying collaboration between corporations, government, and NGOs, which is exactly what we're aiming to achieve in with conversations like today. And then we've got effective early warning systems at 18%, as is robust disaster response plans. So both of those speaking to planning and being proactive in terms of responding to disasters as much as possible. So thank you for those votes there on our second poll. We'll have a third poll coming up later in the discussion as well. But thank you for your votes on that. Now, just a brief overview of the current context. So, when it comes to spending, we've got government has allocated 932 million to the National Disaster Management Center, with more allocated to municipalities as well. So that really does show the importance that government places on this. In this regard, government is also seeking to reorganize administrative structures and financing models to better respond to growing disaster risks. This was the new COGTA Minister, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister, Velinkosi Khadebe, who was speaking in Parliament last week during his department's budget vote, and he's saying that they're looking to reshape so that they're better organized, better structured to respond to disasters there. And then when we look at reports and research in this space, the impacts of climate change is predicted to be widespread, affecting everything from food security, access to water, human safety, and even tourism. As temperatures rise and as we get more incidents of flooding, and in other parts of the country, droughts as well. There's a really good report out from researchers from UCT, Climate Change and the Impacts in South Africa, what it means for a country and its people, and it really goes into depth from that. And we also know from just recent media reports, those images coming out of Cape Town, of KZN, in recent years have been really devastating in that regard. So it really is an important topic for us to discuss today. And then if we look at CSI support for disaster relief, you've got over 62% or around 62% of companies supporting disaster relief programs and efforts. Now, this has come out of our Trialogue 2023 research, the research that you will find in the handbook. And this shows that, South African companies really are coming to the fore. But when we look at a proportion of CSI spend, total CSI spend, which is estimated to be about 11.8 billion rand by big corporates in South Africa, 6% of that is spent on disaster relief. So it clearly shows that more can be done in this regard. So while the investment is wide in terms of people who support it, it could be a lot deeper in terms of how that money in the CSI sector is spent. Then if we look at how the money within disaster relief is spent, you see that almost 2/3 goes to emergency response, which would make sense because that's the immediate, pressing, urgent need as well. But a lot more that can be done around rebuilding of disaster-affected communities. We know that's the real story. How do you rebuild lives, infrastructure, systems, ecosystems as well? Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, which was massive life-changing event, but we see that slowly scaling down. And then obviously preventative efforts, which has come out from that there. So this discussion will really go into how do we really plan our strategic CSI programs today. I'm going to hand over to our panelists now for their opening remarks. Just a reminder, we've got Tebogo Molefe, the Manager of Corporate Social Investment from the IDC, who are supporting us in this webinar this morning. We've got Dr. Moses Khangale, Manager for Stakeholder Programs at Santam, who've done a lot of good work and innovative work in this space. And then Kopano Masilo, the head of the Pretoria cluster delegation from the International Federation of the Red Cross, one of the organizations that are on the front line when disasters happen. Tebogo, I'm going to hand over to you and start with you first on this regard. In terms of the IDC's investment and focus on disaster relief, there are a lot of things you could do and focus on in your CSI work, but why disaster relief, and how do you go about investing in it?
Thank you very much, Sheldon, and thank you to Trialogue for this opportunity. So within IDC, through our CSI, we've got 3 focus areas, which is education and skills development, entrepreneurship development, and consumer education. But because we do not want to be rigid, we have also what we call strategic project portfolio, where we look at anything else outside our focus areas that we feel it's strategic enough for us to support. And also because, we get an allocation for the year, in terms of our budget. And we are cognizant of the fact that, things might change, like it happened with COVID. We had our plans and then COVID hit. And so what do you do? So luckily, because we had that strategic project, we were able to, look at initiatives to support that. So for us, then, with that experience and with the floods, with the unrest that happened in KZN and Gauteng, we also, decided to support, post-recovery initiatives there. But when the floods hit in KZN and the aftermath of that, our EXCO then allocated funding towards immediate relief, but also towards rebuilding. So the overall total for that was allocated was 500 million. 400 million went towards supporting affected businesses, and then the 140 went to support your informal businesses, with 40 million of that specifically allocated towards CSI. What we did when we looked at the whole thing was that we will divide that support into two. We will have your immediate relief, but we'll also have like your long-term rebuilding. So about 60% of that 40 million went towards immediate relief. And how we did that, it went towards immediate relief, and then the 40% went towards rebuilding. And our rebuilding was specifically on infrastructure development, and we linked it to our other focus areas, particularly on ECD, because ECD is one of our focus areas. So we went back, found those ECDs that their buildings were damaged by the floods, and we invested in rebuilding. And the focus there was really to ensure that we implement resilient buildings to avoid them being damaged again should anything like this happen again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tebogo. Dr. Khangale, I want to move over to you now. I mean, in terms of Santam's work in this space, disaster and disaster relief are central to Santam's business. What's the company's strategy when it comes to disaster relief?
No, thanks, Sheldon, and good morning to all the colleagues online. Thanks for inviting us to share some insights on the work that we do. If I just contextualize, Sheldon, disaster relief forms part of our program called Partnership for Risk and Resilience. So if you look at disaster relief, it's not a standalone program. It's embedded in a bigger program, which was designed by the group in 2012 with the sole purpose of collaborating with municipalities, district municipalities and metropolitan municipalities, with specific focus on three key hazards facing South Africa, which is fire, floods, and drought. So the program, since its design, has been working across a number of jurisdictions in the country. And if you look at the key focus areas that we cover, they range from capacity building, disaster response, climate change adaptation, disaster preparedness. But when it comes to disaster relief, this is work that we do generally, irrespective of whether we have a partnership or not. So when disasters happen, we wait for those that are mandated to do what we call rapid assessments, to do those rapid assessments and come out with the needs that then says in this specific area, these are the needs. And we are then able to collaborate with NGOs such as the Red Cross and others who are our partners in terms of ensuring that the relief can reach those that are affected timelessly, and also, of course, ensuring that the right relief goes to where the needs are. I mean, based on the needs, goes to the communities. So that is the approach that we follow. And the reason why we are invested in disaster risk reduction as a whole is that we're seeing an increase in the number of catastrophic and disastrous events, largely linked to changes in the climate space. So as an insurer, it is in our interest to be involved in order to contribute to building resilience, but also contribute to reducing losses for society, losses for businesses, and losses for us as an underwriter in the space. So that is the framework within which we operate. And our program is not a classic CSI program. We do have a CSI department. This program that we coordinate is purpose-built to collaborate and strengthen risk management with selected municipalities. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Khangale. Kopano, looking at you and what the International Federation of the Red Cross does, how do you prepare for disasters, and how does it work with companies and other non-profits?
Okay, thank you very much, Sheldon, and greetings to colleagues. And I'm happy to be part of this important discussion. And of course, I'll bring my own dilemma to the topic. But I think just in one statement, the Red Cross, we normally say it like that, but I think here we have said we come from International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. So this is the international side of the Red Cross. But I'm so happy. I saw that online we have South Africa Red Cross, which I think is focused on everything to do with disasters in South Africa. But just for the benefit of colleagues who might be interacting with us for the first time as an international side of the Red Cross, the Pretoria cluster here, or office, we are looking after a number of countries. So please, Sheldon, bear with me if you find a little bit of bringing some controversy of other countries around South Africa and in the region. Basically, we are in the southern part of Africa, but in Africa we have 15 offices and we operate in all African countries. Globally, we exist in 191 countries. That is the Red Cross. So thank you. Let me say that the disaster management, relief, response, recovery, rebuilding actually is our mandate and our business. For us, this is the main industry which we are created to be in, to protect lives of vulnerable people that are affected by disasters and to rebuild. But the good thing is that in every country, as a legal arrangement, there is a Red Cross organization. Like in South Africa, we have South Africa Red Cross, which is designed and mandated to respond to disasters, working with the government, working with corporates, working with communities. So for us, this business, we have done it for over 100 years, I think, or more. And what we see these days, I think we agree with colleagues. We are saying there is a number of events happening. The frequency is increasing. Climate change is really here affecting people. And we do respond as it is our mandate. But for the immediate response, we have a system which is global, which is the disaster relief emergency system, which is designed to give relief and assistance. In 24 hours, we should be able to be on the ground. In fact, whenever a disaster happened, the Red Cross, because we are formulated in a way that in South Africa, in all provinces, South Africa Red Cross is present, and in communities, it has branches. That means we are designed to be the first responders, but we normally say we don't live because we use communities that live within these areas which are prone to disasters. But increasingly, we like these discussions on investing in resilience building. We have invested in anticipatory actions, which means let us use climate information to predict, to anticipate disasters, and let's see what we can do. And the relevant questions that have been asked on the polls to say, how do we improve early warning systems to reduce the cost of relief? So this is what we are seeing, and we are advocating for this. But emergency response is a mandate. I think no matter how prepared we are, sometimes we cannot manage the scale of disasters and the immediate impact. And we really appreciate that as a Red Cross system, we are present to work with all corporates and partners. I thank you, Dr. Moses, for what you have said. We have committed to make sure that we do the right things, get the right people, getting the right assistance that they deserve in a dignified manner. So hopefully I've been trying to be broad and narrow down to South Africa's situation, which is our international setup, but also our local setup, that in any country, we pledge Red Cross to be present in communities themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kopano. To our audience, I just want to remind you that you can ask questions. Let them come in now while we, go through the prepared part of the Q&A discussion. Please use the Q&A box. Thank you for all your engagements in the chat box. For the questions, post them in the Q&A box. And if you can, please direct, note who it is directed to for the speakers, and keep it succinct so that we can get through as many as possible there. Moses, I want to start with you. I think the focus of today is about strategic CSI within the disaster relief space. Based on Santam's work, on your own experience in this space as well, how can corporations collaborate with government agencies, NGOs, and other stakeholders to really enhance disaster relief efforts?
No, thanks, Sheldon. I think the one issue that could catalyze and improve collaboration is that because of the fact that in disaster response, you have a lot of interested parties, communities, and everybody, including first responders. So what is critical in our own experience is that you need to talk to the right people, and you need to be an active member of the right forums. Because the biggest issue that you see in disaster response and in disaster relief in particular is that if you are uncoordinated as a corporate, your support and your intervention may not be responding to the actual needs. You might sit in your head office and have perceptions about what the needs are. So for us to be able to drive impact on the ground, if you're working in a district municipality or in a provincial space, there will be provincial disaster management advisory forums. There will be standalone forums like joint operation platforms that are set up specifically to respond to a particular disaster. So as a corporate, when there's a disaster in a specific jurisdiction, you need to find, your voice must find expression in those forums so that you are able to, one, understand what are the needs, also understand what other corporates are providing so that you do not duplicate efforts. Because we have also seen over time, and I think it's very common, that when there are disasters, everybody wants to provide food relief or food parcels. And you find that there are other critical needs that are needed by communities and those that are affected that are not being addressed, like rebuilding material, temporary roofing in the form of plastic sheeting and so on. So I think for us, sitting and talking to municipal disaster management centers, provincial disaster management centers, and the National Disaster Management Center depending on the scale of the disaster and where it is coordinated, helps, because you are able to then get a sense of what are the pressing issues and how do you get involved. And one element that is critical, which I think corporates should consider, which is a model that we follow, Sheldon, is that don't wait for disasters to happen to reach out to government. If you work in a specific space, let's say you work in KZN, in terms of your CSI program, and it encompasses relief, reach out to these centers so that you build networks before disasters happen. Because usually when a disaster has happened, you find that disaster practitioners are also under pressure in terms of their responsibility to manage the incidents. But if you establish networks and you are part of these structures and forums, it is easy for you to be able to know who to talk to and be able to ensure that your interventions are impactful.
Thanks there, Moses. Tebogo, coming to you now, looking at it from a corporate investment perspective, how can businesses align their CSI initiatives with disaster response efforts to maximize impact?
Thank you, Sheldon. I think, we can align our corporate investment initiatives by, firstly, I think it's very important, to form or establish partnerships. I think with this type of work, without strategic partnerships, I think you are just doomed for failure. And I think broader partnerships, not only with government, but also, NPOs, agencies, but also other corporates that are also, in that field. I like what what has been mentioned about ensuring that you don't duplicate efforts, because with our experience, we have seen a lot of duplication of efforts, particularly recently with the Western Cape, where we were working with 2 NGO partners, and they were actually, we questioned why they were, both of them, intervening in one particular township. But secondly, for us also, the experience is that you need to allocate resources for disaster relief. Even if maybe it's not going to happen, you are not going to use it. But I think it's important to allocate those resources, and specifically not only cash, but also in kind donations, and also depending on a company's core business, like things like you can support through logistical support. Thirdly, I think implementing sustainable business practices to reduce the risk of disasters. The issue of climate change has been mentioned, and we are seeing disasters happening more and more. So what we are advocating is that we should implement what is really sustainable practices. Lastly, I would say support long-term recovery and rebuilding efforts. Yes, your immediate needs, your food parcels, I think they are very good, especially in the immediate aftermath. But I think a lot of effort needs to go into long-term recovery and rebuilding. And like I said earlier, we have identified that as one of the critical areas. And that's why strategically we are aligning our ECD support with that aspects. But also, for me, it's about regular assessment, I think, and monitoring. We are seeing that you know, with this a kind of work, that there isn't regular or assessment of the work that is being done in this area. And I think for accountability and transparency, I think regular assessment should be done. We should be going back to the beneficiaries to assess whether their need have been met. And without that, I think for me, it's a little bit problematic if we are not, you know, as corporates or agencies that are working in this area, if we are not going to be, you know, assessing the work that we do. And also, I think it's very important that the assessments and the audits are done also independently by third parties, and not by us corporates, you know, assessing the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you there, Tebogo. Kopano, I want to come to you because Moses and Tebogo raise a really important aspect when we talk about disaster response. And that is, you know, resources other than funds. Funds are important because we're able to mobilize them to obviously get necessary resources, right? Other resources, but it's not the only way that corporates can get involved. And I just want to point out the interesting research coming out of America that shows that in instances where corporations are able to assist based on their expertise, you find that there's quicker response, both in the short term, so quicker recovery in the short term, and also longer term rebuilding is often more effective. So when it comes to that, and you're in a disaster, what is your, you know, how do you manage that conversation and that project management with corporates who want to get involved, but you maybe don't need, you know, to be inundated only with money?
Very interesting point. I think I will take the cue from what has been said by my fellow panelists, that when you have collaborations and partnerships, and let me say that building partnerships is a very long process because it's about relationship. But when you have the right relationship where there is trust that is built over time, it can be possible. But as you say, financial resources become very critical in a disaster. And however, technical expertise is also required. But as a Red Cross system where we deal with so many people all the time, and we, I think, let me say, by now we have an experience on coordinating different people and stakeholders, because by design, we are a volunteer management organization where the professionals from different corporates could find a space as volunteers. Let's say there's a flood situation, but some corporates have engineering departments or engineering experts. They would be welcome to the Red Cross, at least, I think, because the Red Cross has been responding to different disasters over years and over a long time. We have the volunteer management systems where people can come in. Of course, we are a brand as well, and there are certain way of approaching communities which we want dignified services. Then we can have some short talks about how to approach disaster relief operations, and then we can engage. I think that if I were to give you just a little bit of figures of when we look at the disaster response, we really see the strength of successful operations through local communities themselves and volunteers from either corporates themselves or from communities coming together to assist in relief operations. And I think from what my colleagues have said from IDC, we present the Red Cross. I'm sure this is not only about Red Cross, even other NPOs still share the same sentiments, where we say that the collaborations really need to take care of the fact that organizations like Red Cross have the expertise, have the knowledge, have access to different communities. So in a disaster situation, we are very happy to lead that side of the equation. And in the Red Cross, what we have realized over years is that before you can have a successful disaster relief operation, let's say response, you will have had long and very decisive capacity building activities that you do. So in between times, because when there is no disaster, we are always at work, training volunteers, building systems. Systems means even building accountability systems. We really are aware that humanitarian sector during disasters can be overloaded with funds, sometimes with lots of people. And we have the duty as NPOs to make sure that we can build strong financial accountability systems where we account for all monies. So for the Red Cross, it's an ongoing business where we build financial accountability systems because we do handle a lot of donor funds even now. In South Africa, I would say that in all the disasters that have happened, we mobilize resources from globally because I think our relationship with corporates also can be better improved before the emergencies come. We have the funding mechanisms that are available. The other one is the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund, where it's a pooled funding that is already here now. It assists people all over the world, regardless whether we negotiated with any corporate on that day or just 2 days after the disaster. It's an existing tool and or a project agreement where we decide what we do on the long term. So I hope that with the NPOs that are available and who are committed to accountability, there's trust and there's coordination such that when a corporate maybe gives you money, they have to understand your strength, your mandate, and they can give you space in a trusted relationship to say, here are the funds, do what we have to do, or if you need technical expertise, they can provide, but they allow you to lead the corporation because in the end, we take responsibility on the operations, both ways. Because for us, it's our life. We stay both from the corporates, which are our credible partners, and also with communities, because we don't leave these communities. So it's better we do successful operations that can protect the relationships two ways. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kopano. Tebogo, I want to turn to the Q&A box. There's some really interesting questions here and on a very practical level as well. So let me start with you, and Moses, you can also give us your thoughts on this as well, because I think it's a very practical and a very real question. So it's from Sipelele Shongwe, who says that given that many corporates are governed by the availability of budget, and with the current economic affairs where CSI budgets are being cut year on year, we know it's a tough economic period just in general as well, so what's the best way to formulate a framework that can ensure that corporates can be able to plan and respond to disaster-stricken communities? So I think it's a budget question, and making that budget as impactful as possible. Tebogo, how do you go about it as a CSI practitioner?
So for us, we've got a budget that is allocated, on an annual basis. So in a particular year, at the beginning of the year, we will know how much we are allocated. But like I said, with some of the strategic projects and especially disaster relief now, under that strategic project, it's now identified as an area of concern. So with the IDC, what will happen is if there is a need, we will go back to EXCO and request additional budget based on an intervention or a strategic project that we feel that it's necessary for the IDC, to support. So we do that. So for us, it's more about identifying what the needs are, and going back if we don't have in our allocation, we can go back and request. And that's what happened with the floods, where we already had a planned budget for the year, but an additional 40 million was actually allocated specifically for flood relief. So with the IDC, there is that flexibility that you can be reallocate. You can allocate additional budget to do this kind of work. But I think the question, I think, is on point, because one of the things, remember, we still new in the space. We only started 2020. So, and we are still learning. And one of the things is exactly that, to say a proactive planning. I think we have been more reactive, but now we have seen that it's very crucial that we plan ahead. And I'm taking what Moses have said, to have that relationships with those municipalities and those government departments that responsible for this. So, because it's been a challenge to us to say, but how do we plan for this? But what we have seen is that it is very much necessary to have a plan for something like this. Thank you.
Okay, Moses, coming to you, and staying on the track of that question, from your experience, what's the best way for companies, in a depressed economic environment, number one, but even at the best of times, because disasters, as Tebogo mentioned there, you can plan for a certain budget, but then a disaster happens such to the scale that your budget may not be enough, and they're being more proactive about their strategy and about their planning. But, how do companies deal with that? Firstly, budgets which are being cut, but then also, working towards something that you don't really know how big it's going to be and how much you want to spend on it.
No, thanks. I think my starting point on this one, Sheldon, would be that, yes, as companies, we predominantly provide financial resources. But I think the point that you raised earlier in your conversation with Kopano around non-financial support, that's also critical, because non-financial support complements what ordinarily would be provided through financial resources. I think that is something that is critical. But with disasters, what is critical, because of course we are focusing on relief, but like Kopano is saying, relief is down in the value chain. The bulk of the work really should happen pre-disaster. That's where the global discourse has evolved to, in terms of the UN frameworks and so on. So that means that you need to be able to do risk assessments to prioritize interventions. You need to know what is likely to happen based on historic data, based on an analysis of current data and future projections, so that you are targeted in your approach. Because there's no corporate that will have money to solve all possible problems. It means that you will need to say, what are the priorities? And of course, you need to be able to use your convening power to mobilize other corporates, because it's difficult for a community that works with Santam to go to another organization, but it's easy for us as a business to invite our other stakeholders to say, we're working in this specific area, solving this specific problem, and we feel that our resources cannot reach all elements of the problem. Then we mobilize others. because we have what we call convening power. You know, we are able to speak to our partners within the subsector and in other areas where we work. But one of the critical things which is gonna be linked, in my view, to the point that our colleague Tebogo raised earlier, is which relate to M&E post-intervention, is work with mandated organizations. Because this is critical in the sense that when you are gone, these mandated organizations, like the Red Cross, as Kopano was saying, they remain in the community. So you are able to ensure that your interventions are institutionalized. It's not a smash and grab, you know, or hit and run. It is an institution that finds expression in someone or in an organization that is mandated beyond your presence. So that means that whatever amount of money you spend, you're not wasting, because if you don't work with mandated organizations, when you're gone, you find that those interventions or those programs are not institutionalized. If you work with a municipality, it's easy to get those programs into the integrated development plans of municipalities, so that beyond your intervention and beyond your stay in a particular jurisdiction, those initiatives remain as part of the agenda of the organizations that you work with.
Okay, thank you, Moses. Not quite a question, but a comment, and I suppose in addition to the the conundrum of budgets and the nature of budgets. Sabira Asmal saying that, as mentioned, corporates are governed by budget availability. This is in reference to Sipelele's question, and often when disaster strikes, Sabira writes, the documentation and processes to approve assistance can be tedious and time-consuming. Need to formulate an efficient and standard process so aid or rebuild can be delivered with the urgency that is necessary. I think everyone would agree with the sentiments of that comment there. Kopano, turning to you, I mean, when we think of disaster relief, even in the framing of this conversation, we're speaking about large-scale disasters, and rightfully so, due to the impact that it has on the number of people. I think even just now in the Western Cape, you've got 33,000 households affected, meaning about 95,000 people, and that's on the conservative side, affected by the flooding that we're seeing there. But we've got a question from Nokwanda, saying, we're wondering how can we appeal to the corporates to assist with smaller disasters? Now, obviously, you're not a corporate, but in terms of the scale of disasters, if you're living in a community and we know it's winter, shack fires are often quite, a problem during winter as people try to keep warm. Now, this may not be on a large scale in terms of the pure numbers in that instance, but it happens often. And to those people who are affected, they've often lost everything. There's not much for them to turn back to. So when it comes to these smaller disasters, and I use that in inverted commas because lives are affected here and often lives are lost, how can communities, appeal to both corporates, NPOs, as well, government, from a municipal level, corporate governance level? How can they get the help that they need?
Very important question, Sheldon, because legally we know, or otherwise emotionally, when there's big disasters, that's when many people are moved and they're able to contribute to a disaster response. But our observation is that in the small-scale disasters, we really need good organizations on the ground that can volunteer to speak on behalf of the affected communities. In most cases, our experience in disaster response is that once a localized disaster event is well documented and can be talked about or shared, or even on international media or national media, that's when it gets a little bit of attention. But you are right, what we are seeing is that some of these localized small-scale disasters, they really go unnoticed, and sometimes nobody really worries about them. But I think the organizations like the one we represent, when we talked about presence in communities, we are behind a huge interest of what we call localization. Localization meaning let's be interested in the people who live around these areas. But of course, it's a lot of work because if we know certain areas, maybe our informal settlements where sometimes the fires get in and then can affect a number of people, we should be building systems of mapping these risks and analyzing the impact and now having the dialogue before even small-scale disasters happen. That's where the localization comes in, meaning the Red Cross branches, which are people that live there, they have a duty on daily basis to do what we call humanitarian diplomas, meaning going to those municipality offices, meeting the corporates who are local in that area to talk, to create spaces. So I think my point of encouragement is that the corporates should really, I like this dialogue, and because it's a good practice to open discussions before disasters are there. If there is a huge push for engagement at the local level, maybe it is a challenge, Sheldon, to Trialogue, maybe to try and let's document the small-scale disasters and map out who was there, who assisted, and why not. But I think it's a matter of profiling, it's a matter of communicating this, but there has to be NPOs like Red Cross who are every day interested in this, because big-scale disasters, that's when the legal frameworks come in, where the municipalities and the national government would declare disasters. That's a little bit better because it attracts enough attention from the big corporates and international systems. But at the local level, maybe we have to have a count on are we doing enough? But for us as a Red Cross, we emphasize on one point, let us look beyond our headquarters. Where are we every day in communities to understand their problems and build this response mechanisms? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much there, Kopano. A quick time check, we're at 10:30, so just under 30 minutes of the discussion left. It really is fascinating, interesting, and I hope that you're getting value. And thank you for your questions. Please keep them coming. Patsy, your question similar to Nokwanda's one about informal structures, rental dwellings, and how they're recognized, and obviously the help that they get through that. And I think Kopano's point around localization, about being aware and obviously using those systems in the same way that we do with larger scale disasters, to have a look at how do we respond to those smaller disasters there. Tebogo, I want to come to you because John makes a comment here, asks a question, and I think it goes to the cynicism we sometimes see, and rightfully so. John making the point that our companies and corporates looking for BE points or other sort of benefits through through donating money, so tax breaks and the like. And as Kopano had mentioned, the ones that, disasters that are on the biggest scale, we've got companies get involved, you've got coverage of those through the media as well. To people who may have a cynical view about why corporates get involved, is it only for, the benefits that the corporates, seem to reap? If things like these are publicized, or there are the tax breaks and the incentives?
I think from speaking from the IDC, I think for us it's not just about BEE points. I think if you look at particularly with the flood relief, that we were already making our BEE points, but an additional 500 million, was made available for flood relief, for disaster relief. So yes, those things are important in terms of meeting the legislative frameworks, and we need to comply with that, but it's not necessarily the reason why we get involved. And I also just wanted to respond to a comment that was made about the processes within corporates for approval. And just to say, with the IDC, we were mindful that monies needed to be dispersed very quickly. So what happened was, a committee, specific committee for approvals of flood relief and disaster relief was put in place, and they were meeting on a regular basis. If there was an application that needed to be approved, they were available to do that. And recently now, with the recent floods, particularly in the Western Cape, we were able to ensure that we get those approvals very quickly via round robin. So I think there are corporates out there, and I think there is a lot that are really sensitive to the needs of those communities and want to ensure that they release funds as quickly as possible. Thank you.
All right, thank you there, Tebogo. Just to stay with that question, I see Lulu Kumalo, thank you, has provided an answer as well to John's question. If you can't see it, I'll just read it quickly. Lulu saying not necessarily, but since SED budgets are based on the formula dictated by the BBBE code, the section 18A will inadvertently form part of the evidence submitted during verification. Corporates contribute or provide aid to alleviate whatever situation the affected communities are facing at the time of displacement there. So thank you very much for that, Lulu. John, I hope both Tebogo's comment and Lulu's answers have given you some more insight there. Now, Priya Naidu asks, are educational institutions, example universities, conducting research on climate resilient agriculture? This would be an interesting topic to explore, i.e. possible practices that farmers can practice. Now, Priya, I'm not going to pose that necessarily, but what I am going to do is into the chat box, I'm going to post a link to some research which has come out of the University of Cape Town, which you and others I think will find very interesting. And one of the chapters speaks specifically to food security. And if you didn't see missed our webinar last month, that was around food security in working on farmers. But there's a great intersection when it comes to disaster relief, because as Tebogo mentioned, things like ECD venues and structures are destroyed in the flooding. So that has an impact on children. So it's not just the feeding that happens. If you have things like flooding and you're in the Western Cape or parts of KZN, part of our key parts of our agricultural system, that's going to impact the food security there. Changes in temperature will affect tourism, as is made in this report here. So Priya, I've posted that to the chat box, and anyone else, when you've got some time, go through it. And it may help to answer your question in more depth than we can during this webinar at the moment. Moses, due to Santam's work with municipalities, and often our outlying municipalities we know are skills scarce in a lot of key sectors, whether it's financial management, whether it's disaster relief. So you often work in municipalities that need the most assistance here. We've got a question, and I'll just get to it here quickly, regarding, do municipalities have a look at, vulnerable communities settling in areas which are vulnerable to flooding and the like, so close to rivers and the like? Is that part of the preventative actions that you spoke about?
Yes, no, thanks. That is a complex dynamic, that we see where communities locate themselves in high risk areas, and often, Sheldon, such settling by communities is done without the approvals of governmental agencies. So in other words, there's this, where people forcefully occupy a specific space. Usually it will be wetlands and floodplains, and when the rains come, you normally see that they get, affected. So that is something that we see mostly in urban areas, and municipalities need to manage that through, bylaws and in enforcing spatial planning and zoning regulations, which is not always easy because this settling in high-risk area often takes a political dimension as well. So it is a complex issue which talks to availability of land in urban spaces and so on, which is something that for a corporate can be very difficult to manage. You could provide advice to the municipality, which then should have the capacity to enforce its own bylaws. But earlier, I wanted to come in on two things, Sheldon. The issue of small-scale disasters. Well, let's call them small-scale incidents, because disaster in the South African context takes a particular definition. So small-scale incidents are problematic because they are often not publicized. And what is the advice that we can give to grassroots organization? If you look, and I think it links to localization, any local community will have a hardware, will have a wholesaler who sells, foodstuffs and so on. Our advice is that NGOs working in disaster relief in those communities should, before disasters occur, engage these people. Because you might find that somebody who provides building supply material, they also have a CSI program. What is the focus of their CSI program? Because if they supply building materials in a specific jurisdiction and they are open to including disaster relief in their CSI program, it means when there are small-scale incidents, they could provide a starter pack, for someone to rebuild or re-roof on a temporary basis to their infrastructure. There's, of course, also human settlement, which has grants that are tailor-made to deal with some of those things which could be utilized. Then the last point that I wanted to mention, we keep saying systems, and Kopano made reference to systems. Tebogo made reference to M&E systems. What I wanted to also indicate to the colleagues on the platform is that we're not talking about IT systems. We're talking about protocols, procedures. So in other words, an NGO should already know in terms of its own protocol when a disaster happened. This could be a one-pager, Sheldon, that says, this is how I will approach donors, and if the donors respond, this is how I will sequence my intervention, this is how I will account for the resources that have been given. So the word systems in here means a way of doing things, because we see that in most disasters, systems are not there. How do you evacuate communities? You always see that when people are evacuated into community halls, how do you safeguard their properties and so on and so forth? So I think it's small system-related issues and procedures and protocols that we need to build up so that when major disasters happen, they find that we are ready and we are agile as communities, as corporates, and as government, and as interested parties involved in disaster risk management.
Okay, thank you there, Moses. Kopano, I want to turn to you quickly, and then Tebogo, Moses, please, feel free to add to this one as well, just before we get to the closing remarks. But we've got two questions here, both within the same theme of volunteering and training. Now, we know disaster response is very labor intensive, no matter what, what aspect you're having a look at. So Mate says, we have another great resource in the country for disaster relief response, young people who are not in education, training, and employment. We obviously know we have a high youth unemployment rate. So I think, Mate, having a look at how do we in the intersection between the two. How are corporates engaging this audience, so young people, in disaster relief efforts, which could open some career opportunities for them, And then Samukele, so let me just put them together. Samukele, adding, a legal framework to the question, saying, a legal framework where volunteers can get proper training. So I think he brings in an important point. It's not just about the training; it's that people get proper training in this regard. Tebogo, Kopano, let me start with you quickly. Snapshot, 1 or 2 minutes. When it comes to training youth, training people, resources. You said between disasters, that's a lot of the focus of the Red Cross. What plans, initiatives, programs do you have in place, to train volunteers, and possibly even as where you are pushing people into employment opportunities?
Thank you. So I like this point where you talked about the young people. And of course, we recognize that Africa is a young continent. And in the Red Cross, we have even a youth program, which is dedicated to mobilize the young people to be trained in the Red Cross culture, because the Red Cross culture is basically a volunteering culture, a culture of providing care and support to those that need it in a dignified manner. So some of the training opportunities that we do are really related to the services we provide. I think one of the things that Red Cross is historically known of is first aid, and maybe now we are expanding to community care. But what you see in the Red Cross, a lot of human resource is really volunteers. But the good thing when Dr. Moses said about systems, which I liked him to simplify it, is that in organizations like ours, we already have policies. We already have a culture of waking up tomorrow and absorbing so many South Africans into an organization which they are expected to behave as its values. So that's what it means. We have protocols and we have the open heart to absorb people, because recruiting volunteers can be very strange when you are not used to it. Accepting people of different backgrounds from different situations to come and serve humanity. So what we do is really depending on the type of programs we have, like people who are managing Red Cross first aid trainings. They are well trained. They have to pass. It's a technical course, and South Africa is Red Cross is really good in this. Then it means they have skills. They can train first aid for corporates, and there's an arrangement, of course, because it's a service, it's an education of charges, and then. But beyond that, if there are other service that we do, like I know that South Africa Red Cross is providing a lot of support to the orphans, and that means they have social workers. They are trained and they do this job. But training is a big word that we always do, because we use communities, we use university students, we use the young ones. Currently in the Red Cross commitments, we have decided to use youth for tree planting as a contribution for climate change. But it's not just planting, it's plant and care. So we try to change their mindset to be responsible citizens. I think I could go on and on, but it really depends on the type of services. But what we are discussing internally is also not to be shy about creating opportunities for the young ones. If they are well trained, we can give reference. Sometimes we take them on internships, because companies, sometimes they need experience of somebody who can provide reference, and we are happy to facilitate them to be employed or to be taken as good resources in different companies. But it's really an important. So one contribution, I think, in the issue of small-scale disasters, in the Red Cross system, we are also building institutional funds, where the Red Cross should have its own funds that it can out of its discretion, whether a disaster is just 2 or 3 or 10 people, we can disburse from own resources. Maybe this is a question which corporates can also consider, not to only give during disaster, which is exceptionally good, but also building institutional funds in the NPOs that can also be monitored, of course, accounted for. It's not free money. It's money for public good, but it provides that ability to respond without having to go through systems every other time there's a disaster. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then Tebogo, just to come to you quickly on that note, the IDC, part of your CSI is obviously also education and skills development. Is it something that you look at in terms of capacity building within the disaster relief space, in terms of upskilling youth in any way?
Yes, Sheldon, we do. Actually, it's one of our critical targets. And with some of the partners that we have worked with, particularly if I can just mention Food Forward South Africa, which was one of our partners in disaster relief. They have actually a youth skills program that we particularly supported. And some of those young people, after graduating, some of them were actually even incorporated into the company. So those are some of the things that we look at, because youth unemployment is one of our critical focus areas. As an agency of government, it is part of the targets. Youth employment and women, it's one of the targets for the IDC. Thank you.
All right. Moses, coming to you, and want to get to this question from Theo, and I think you're at the perfect intersection between being a big corporate but also working in municipalities, often in rural and semi-rural areas here. It seems like the CSI focus, this is Theo now saying, is the CSI focus is primarily focused on metropolitan municipalities, and one can there are various reasons why that happens, but Theo's right there. If this is correct, what is the approach to support municipalities in rural, semi-rural, agricultural areas? Is what Theo asks, and then he's got a yes, metropolitan. Yeah, so that's fine. So in terms of the perception, Moses, is the perception true that it seems to be most CSI focus is in metropolitan municipalities, and if that is the case, what is being done either way to support municipalities in rural, semi-rural, agricultural areas, often where resources and skills are thinner than your metropolitans?
Yes, no, thanks Theo for that question. I think in our case as Santam, we deliberate and very intentional about the selection of municipalities that we work with. Yes, we have strong presence in metro spaces where we, for example, currently have an MOU with City of Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, as well as eThekwini. But we also go out to drive social justice imperatives in terms of building systems to manage local risks. We're working, for example, with Alfred Nzo district, which is one of the poorest districts in South Africa. We're working with in Eastern Cape. We're working with a municipality in Northern Cape called Pixley, which is also one of the poorer districts. We're working in Jotabi. We select specific areas where we see that there's no capacity to manage local risks, and we contribute to building systems in those areas, because we realize that if everybody was to focus in the metros, these small-scale incidents that we are talking about will continue to undermine livelihoods and erode asset base of vulnerable people in rural districts. So we do a lot of work. We buy firefighting equipment. We provide training as well to young people in these poor districts, so that when disasters happen, they have a system to respond and contain losses and be able to protect their livelihoods as well.
All right. Thank you so much to my panelists and my guests. I'll come to you in a bit for your closing statements, but I just want to put up our third and final poll to give you a chance to vote so that we can see those results there. The question is, which area should companies focus on the most when investing in disaster relief efforts in South Africa? There's a single choice. You've got to choose one. Let us know what you think as our audience, companies, which areas companies should focus on. I'll leave that up for a bit while you vote on that, and to prepare my panelists for their closing remarks. So I'm going to ask you in 1 minute to leave our audience with the one thing corporates or NPOs can do, the most important thing you think that they should leave with from today's discussion, for them to wrap it up. So a minute, think of it as a tweet. Your final comment. It really has been an engaging conversation. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to our audience for having stayed with us for the 90 minutes. Where did 90 minutes go? And just a reminder that at the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. Please leave us your feedback. We would love to hear from you on that one as well. So let's just go to the poll quickly. Okay, 47% going long-term recovery and rebuilding. So I'm really excited about that, encouraged by it, because it goes to what we've been talking about through this webinar, and obviously looking forward to being more strategic. 47% saying long-term recovery and rebuilding, 21% saying vulnerability and risk assessment, again, planning in the theme coming through, 11% saying inclusive support for marginalized groups, very important, 11% as well saying technological innovations and data analytics for disaster management. I think that goes to planning again as well, and using technology to be proactive. And then 9% saying immediate emergency relief, which will always still be important as well. So thank you very much for voting in the poll there. Those results will be shared. And then to go to my panelists now, Tebogo, let's start with you. 1 minute, what is the one thing that you want to leave corporates and NPOs with?
I think for corporates, I would like to see us being more flexible in our requirements when we deal with disaster relief. And then for NPOs, I would say capacity development, because with flood relief, we deal with this big NGOs. So I would like to see them really training and providing capacity to local communities and CBOs. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Moses, over to you. Your one thing you want to leave NPOs and corporates with.
No, thanks, Sheldon. I think with corporates, my plea will be to get involved in community-based, disaster risk reduction initiatives, and specifically efforts that engages young people in risk reduction. Whether you clean stormwater, whatever you do that reduces risks, but engages them in a productive manner. And I think for NPO, let's engage with our local authorities, governmental authorities at the local level, so that you are able to streamline your contribution into this particular program.
Thank you. Kopano, you bringing it home for us. What's the one thing you would want to leave NPOs and corporates with in terms of their strategic efforts in this regard?
Let me say to corporates, we should look at the humanitarian industry as an investment. And so it's part of your business to have decisions on humanitarian investments. We can take out the word relief and everything else, but it's humanitarian investment, which will look at those relief activities, but investing in people and communities. So on the NPO side, I want to encourage all of us to never go back on localization, building branches and communities, and using the digital information for anticipating disasters and mitigating the risk, because there's not enough money. But if we use technology and anticipation, we can reduce a lot. So I think that will be my closing remarks. And of course, communities will always survive with disasters or not. So let's hear them, let's involve them, let's be part of them. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kopano. And thank you to all my panelists, Tebogo, Dr. Khangale, Kopano. Thank you very much for your time and graciously spending it with us today and sharing your knowledge and insights on this. I think if I were to summarize it, I think there's a very encouraging theme coming through from the conversation about planning, both in terms of from the disaster side, in terms of where we're going as an environment, so in terms of climate change, but also from a CSI perspective. You know, how do we plan both in terms of our financial commitments, but also the resources, and thinking cleverly, thinking outside the box in terms of how we respond to disasters, and how we plan for disasters. You know, aspects such as training and melding it with other CSI projects, such as skills development, and hopefully unemployment, you know, alleviating unemployment as well. So please keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts. This is a really interesting part of the CSI development space. And hopefully we see that spending changing and going from, you know, higher than 9%, which it's currently at, which looks at the preventative CSI spend. Hopefully it goes to higher than that for the disaster relief spend due to conversations such as these. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm Sheldon Moraes. Thank you very much from Trialogue for your joining us today. A recording will be made available, as well as an article on this, which will be shared on the Knowledge Hub. If you've registered, the recording will be sent to you as well, for you to revisit any of the aspects that you want to go through. Thank you for your engagement in the chat box. Thank you for your questions as well. They really did drive the conversation forward. And we look forward to seeing you next month for our next webinar. Remember, every last Thursday of the month, we get to spend time with you. And thank you very much for today's discussion. If you wouldn't mind taking the short survey, and I look forward to seeing you and spending time with you next month on the last Thursday as well. So thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.